What if a moment of weakness revealed a secret so serious that it threatened to undo all you'd accomplished that night? I didn't simply open a door. I opened Pandora's box, and as my stepson stepped in, the secret I'd been keeping was about to be revealed, permanently altering the path of our lives. This is more than simply a mistake. It's a ticking time bomb. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can keep giving you intriguing, genuine tales like these. Don't forget to watch this video till the conclusion. And since this narrative is going to be so exciting, please like the video to express your support. I did not anticipate anybody to be home that night. The home was peaceful, dimly lit by the warm glow of a few scattered lamps, and the rain outside patterned softly against the windows. I had poured myself a glass of wine, something rich and red, and settled into the solitude of my room. A rare indulgence these days. Loneliness has a way of creeping in when you least expect it, doesn't it? My husband Liam was away on another one of his business trips, something I'd long since grown used to. But this time I wasn't just lonely, I felt restless on edge in a way I couldn't quite name. It was an ache that no amount of self-control could quiet. So I made a choice, a private one, something to fill the vacuum, even if only for a short time. I had barely started when I heard a faint noise outside my door. At first, I assumed it was the wind shaking the ancient frame, or the house shifting, as it often did. But then I heard it again. Footsteps. My heart accelerated, but I convinced myself it was nothing. My stepson Oliver had mentioned going out with friends earlier, and there was no reason to think he'd come back so soon. And yet I froze when I heard his voice, soft but close. "Amelia, are you okay in there?" Panic swept over me. The room was dark except for the faint flicker of the TV screen. I fumbled with the remote, trying to switch it off, but my hands betrayed me, trembling with urgency. The sound, the unmistakable damning sound, echoed louder than ever. "Amelia." His voice came again closer, this time before I could find the words. To send him away, the door creaked open. I hadn't locked it there. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with surprise. For a moment, neither of us moved, caught in a web of shock and embarrassment. I don't know what I expected him to do. Turn away, laugh, maybe even say something cutting. But what I saw in his expression was something else entirely. Curiosity? I thought something was wrong. He stammered his gaze, flickering between me and the camera, the screen before darting away. "It's not my fault." I faltered. It's not what it looks like, except it was. My face burned as I scrambled for an excuse, but the words didn't come. The tension in the room was so intense that I couldn't even breathe, suffocating like a fragile thread pulled taut and ready to snap. Finally, he cleared his throat and muttered, I should go, but he didn't. Instead, he lingered for just a moment longer, as though he couldn't bring himself to look away, and in that instant, something shifted. It wasn't just the embarrassment or the awkwardness, it was the unspoken understanding that neither of us would forget what had just happened. When the door finally closed, and I was alone again, I sat there in silence, the wine glasses still clutched in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest, not from fear, but from something deeper, something I didn't want to name. That night, I told myself it was just a mistake, a fluke, but deep down, I knew better. Some lines, once crossed, can never be redrawn, and this was only the beginning. When Oliver moved back home, I expected the same reserved, distant boy I had met years ago when Liam and I married. But at 25, he wasn't a boy anymore. He had a quiet confidence about him now, an easy charm that I hadn't noticed before he'd grown into himself. And though I told myself it was inappropriate to notice such things, I couldn't help but feel a pang of awareness whenever he was around, That awareness nagged at me after our first encounter. It wasn't just the embarrassment of him catching me in such a vulnerable moment. It was the look in his eyes, the curiosity, the way he hesitated as though something about what he'd seen intrigued him as much as it mortified him. I avoided him for the next few days, retreating into the kitchen when I heard his footsteps, or pretending to be busy in the garden. But Oliver, it seemed, was determined to bridge the awkwardness. One evening, he knocked on the kitchen door as I was washing dishes. "Hey," he said, leaning casually against the frame. "I didn't mean to scare you." The other night, I kept my eyes fixed on the suds, the warm water, a welcome distraction. "It's fine. I should have locked the door." "You don't have to explain," he said quickly. "I mean, everyone deserves their privacy." There was a beat of silence before, he added. "But you seemed upset. Are you okay?" The question caught me off guard. It had been years since someone had asked me that really asked, as though they cared about the answer. Liam was often too preoccupied with work, and I'd long since learned to bury my feelings under the veneer of a perfect wife. "I'm fine," I said too quickly, then softened. "Thank you for asking." He nodded, but didn't move. His presence filled the small kitchen, and I felt the air between us shift. Charged with something unspoken, the tension didn't break. It lingered, wrapping around us in subtle, insidious ways. Over the next few weeks, Oliver and I fell into a strange rhythm. He was attentive in ways Liam had never been. He'd offer to help me with small tasks, bringing in groceries, fixing a leaky faucet, or even just sitting with me on the porch as the sun set. One evening, as we shared a bottle of wine on the back deck, he surprised me with a question. "Do you ever get lonely? Eva-Melia?" I paused the glass halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Liam is gone a lot, and it seems like you don't have many people to talk to." His words struck a nerve I didn't know I had. "That's not true," I said more defensively than I intended. Oliver shrugged, his gaze steady. "I'm just saying I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to, or not talk to, whatever you need." There was something disarming about his honesty. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. It happened again. Late one night, I had gone downstairs to fetch a glass of water, only to find Oliver sitting in the living room, illuminated by the glow of the TV. He looked up as I entered, his expressions softening. When he saw me couldn't sleep, he asked. I shook my head. "Not really want to join me." I hesitated, but finally sank into the chair across from him. The silence between us was comfortable at first, but then he turned off the TV and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. About the other night, he began, his voice low. I tensed, "Oliver. We don't need to talk about that." "Maybe not." He agreed, but I can't stop thinking about it. My breath caught. Oliver stood then, crossing the room to sit on the edge of the coffee table, inches from me. "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I think you feel it too." The weight of his words hung between us, undeniable and terrifying. I opened my mouth to protest, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth betrayed me. I couldn't deny it anymore. That night was the first time we crossed the line. It wasn't planned and it wasn't logical, but it was inevitable. The days that followed were a blur of stolen moments and whispered promises. We told ourselves it was just a fling, something fleeting to fill the emptiness. But the more time we spent together, the harder it became to pretend it wasn't something deeper. Oliver was intoxicating in a way I hadn't experienced in years. He made me feel seen, alive and desired. But with every secret touch and lingering glance, the risk grew. Liam was due home in a few weeks, and though we were careful, the strain of secrecy began to wear on both of us. One afternoon, as we were returning from a discreet outing to a nearby park, we were cut off guard by an unexpected visitor. Isabella Oliver's ex-girlfriend. She stood on the front porch, her arms crossed, a sly smile playing on her lips. Oliver, she drawl, long time, no see. Her eyes flicked to me, lingering just a second too long. I felt an uneasy chill creep down my spine. Isabella Oliver said, his tone carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, just thought I'd stop by," she said, sweetly, though her expression betrayed her ulterior motives. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." As she spoke, her gaze shifted between us, and I knew. Somehow, she knew this marked the beginning of our unraveling. Isabella's presence was a threat neither of us had anticipated, and her cunning was sharper than either of us realized. She had a knack for prying into things that didn't concern her, and it wasn't long before she started asking questions. Neither Oliver nor I wanted to answer. As the stakes rose, so did the tension. While I tried to maintain the facade of a normal life, the cracks were beginning to show. Isabella's reappearance had thrown everything off balance. She claimed her visit was spontaneous, but I could feel the calculation behind every word. She spoke every glance she cast my way. Her eyes lingered just a second too long on Oliver. When she thought I wasn't looking, her smile carrying an edge that felt more like a warning. But Oliver and I tried to carry on as if she didn't unsettle us. We told ourselves she was just a distraction, a relic from his past that had no bearing on the connection we were building. Still, her arrival gnawed at me. A week later, Liam called to tell me his business trip was being extended. His voice was distant, more focused on the work he had to manage than the woman waiting for him at home. "I'll be back in 2 more weeks, maybe 3, he said, almost as an afterthought. I told him to take care of himself, my tone calm and measured. Inside, I felt a pang of guilt and relief. That night, a storm rolled in. The rain came in heavy sheets drumming against the roof and windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the power flickered once before going out, completely plunging the house into darkness. I lit a few candles and tried to settle with a book, but my nerves were on edge when I heard Oliver's voice calling from downstairs. "Eve-Amelia, you okay up there?" "I'm fine," I called back, just trying not to trip over anything. A moment later, his flashlight beam lit the staircase as he cleaned up to join me. The power company said it might be a few hours. He said, "Mind if I hang out up here?" I hesitated. "Sure, if you don't mind the candles." He grinned better than sitting alone in the dark. We ended up sitting on the living room floor, sharing a blanket, as the storm raged outside. Oliver had brought a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen, and the two of us passed it back and forth, letting its warmth take the edge off the chill. "Do you ever wonder what you'd be doing if you weren't here?" he asked. Suddenly, I frowned. "What do you mean if you hadn't married Liam? If you weren't stuck in this house all the time?" The question startled me. "I'm not stuck," I said, though the words felt hollow. Ow, even as I spoke them. Oliver raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you Liam? Is never here? You don't seem happy. I don't know. I think you deserve more than this." He added, his voice soft. My heart twisted at his words. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was perfect, content. But as I opened my mouth, the truth came tumbling out instead. "I don't know what I'd be doing," I admitted. "Sometimes I think about it, what my life would have been like if I'd made different choices. But it doesn't matter. Now does it? This is my life." Oliver leaned closer, his expression soft but intense. "It doesn't have to be." The air between us was heavy, charged with the same tension that had been simmering for weeks. I should have stopped it. I should have walked away, but instead I let myself be drawn in. When his hand brushed against mine, I didn't pull back. In the days that followed, our stolen moments became more daring. Oliver and I found excuses to leave the house together. A trip to the farmer's market here, a hike on a secluded trail. There. It wasn't just about the thrill of being together. It was the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. It was the way he listened when I spoke, the way he made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, we ended up at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The place was nearly empty, and we sat in a booth tucked away in the corner, our knees brushing beneath the table. "I feel like I'm living someone else's life," I said, stirring my coffee, absent. Oliver tilted his head, studying me. "Why do you say that?" "Because this isn't who I am," I said quietly. "I'm not the kind of person who does this." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Maybe you are. Maybe you just didn't know it until now." I wanted to believe him. Isabella wasn't done with us. Oliver had told her we were just family, that there was nothing going on between us, but she didn't buy it. One evening, as I was returning from the Rye store, I found her car parked outside the house. I walked in to find her in the living room with Oliver. Her voice raised an accusation. "You are lying to me," she said. "I can see it all over your face. Isabella, you're being ridiculous." Oliver said, his tone calm but firm. Her gaze snapped to me as I entered. "You're part of this, aren't you? What's going on between you two?" I forced myself to stay calm. "Isabella, this isn't appropriate." "Oh, I think it's very appropriate," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think I don't know what's going on? I've seen the way you look at each other. Do you really think you can keep this a secret?" My heart pounded, but I refused to let her see me falter. "You're mistaken," I said evenly, "and I think it's time for you to leave." Isabella's smile was sharp and cold. "Oh, I'll leave, but this isn't over." After Isabella left, Oliver and I sat in silence. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. "She knows," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "She doesn't have proof," Oliver replied, though he didn't sound convinced. "It doesn't matter." I said, "She's not going to let this go." Oliver reached for my hand. "We'll figure it out together." His words were comforting, but the weight of guilt was growing heavier by the day. Every time I saw Liam's face on a video call, every time I thought about the life I was risking, it became harder to justify what we were doing. And yet I couldn't stop. Isabella's threat lingered over us like a storm cloud. She didn't have proof, but her sharp instincts and boldness made her dangerous and Oliver dear. Sweet Oliver. Believed that ignoring her would make her go away. "It's just talk," he assured me. One evening, his arm draped over the back of the couch as we sat close together. "It's not just talk," I snapped, pushing away from him. "You didn't see her face when she left. She knows Oliver. She's looking for a way to destroy us. And what do you want me to do? Pay her off." His frustration flared, but it fizzled as quickly as it rose. "I'll handle her, Evamilia. I promise." But I wasn't convinced Isabella wasn't the type to be handled before Oliver had a chance to act on his promise. Liam came home early, 3 days ahead of schedule. I was in the kitchen when I heard the front door creak open, followed by his heavy footsteps. My stomach dropped. Oliver was upstairs, and while there was nothing incriminating in the house, the sheer proximity of the two men made my pulse race. Amelia, Liam called his voice rough from travel. I forced my tone to sound cheerful, wiping my hands on a dish towel. As I turned to greet him, he stepped into the kitchen, setting his suitcase by the door. His face looked more tired than usual, the lines around his mouth deeper. "You didn't tell me you were coming back early," I said. "Got through the meetings faster than I expected." His eyes scanned the room. "Is Oliver around?" The question caught me off guard. Liam had never shown much interest in Oliver's comings and goings before he's upstairs. I think I said carefully. Liam grunted and poured himself a glass of water. "I saw Isabella's car parked out front the other day when I called to check in." What's that about? My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my expression neutral. I didn't see her. Maybe she stopped by to talk to Oliver. Liam nodded but didn't press further. Still, his mention of Isabella left a sour taste in my mouth. It didn't take long for Isabella to reappear. One evening, while Liam was out running errands, I found her waiting on the front porch. When I came home from a walk, her arms were crossed, her eyes glinting with malice. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady as though she knew she had the upper hand. I considered ignoring her, but the determination in her stance told me she wouldn't leave without a confrontation. "What do you want?" "Isabella?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. She smirked. "Stalked her." To the point, I like that." She paused before adding, "I want Oliver." Her words were sharp and unapologetic, and I think I knew where this was headed. "Whatever this is between the two of you," she continued, "it's not going to last. So why don't you step aside and let him come back to me?" I laughed bitterly. "Oliver is a grown man. He can make his own decisions." Her smile widened. "Of course he can. But how do you think Liam would feel if he knew about your little arrangement or the rest of the world? For that matter?" My throat tightened. "You wouldn't." She leaned in her voice, dropping to a whisper. "All it takes is one little text, a picture here, a message there, and your perfect little life comes crashing down." That night, I told Oliver everything we have to stop her. I said if she tells Liam, it's over for both of us. Oliver nodded, his jaw set. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand." But when he returned from their meeting the next day, his face was pale, his hands clenched into fists. "She's not backing down," he said. "She wants money, lots of it." My stomach turned. "How much 50,000? He said. She says, "It's for her silence." "We can't give her that," I said, pacing the room. "She'll just come back for more." Oliver stood abruptly, his frustration boiling over then. "What do you suggest?" "Amelia." Because I'm out of ideas, I didn't have an answer. Desperate, I turned to my closest friend, Claire. She'd always been clever and resourceful, and I despised the thought of bringing her into this situation. I did not see another alternative. When I told her the truth, her eyes widened in shock. "Amelia," she said, "do you have any ideas? How much trouble are you in? I did not intend for this to happen." I said, tears are in my eyes. "It simply occurred." She moaned and rubbed her temples. "Okay, let's think this through. Isabella's a problem, but she's not invincible. There has to be something we can use against her." It turned out there was Claire dug into Isabella's past, uncovering a trail of unpaid debts and a recent brush with the law. Armed with this information, we devised a plan to force Isabella's hand. The confrontation took place in a neutral location, a coffee shop on the edge of town. Claire and I waited at a corner table. The tension between us, palpable when Isabella arrived. She looked confident, almost smug. "I'm flattered," she said, as she slid into the seat across from us. "Didn't think you'd have the guts to face me." "We're done playing your game," Claire said, sliding a folder across the table. Isabella opened it, her expression faltering as she took in the contents. "Where did you get this?" she demanded. "That's not important," Claire said coolly. "What is important is that we know who you really are, and if you keep pushing, we won't hesitate." To make this public, Isabella's composure cracked, but she recovered quickly. "You think this scares me. I have nothing to lose." "Maybe," I said, "but Oliver does, and so do I. So here's the deal. You walk away, and we won't come after you. But if you so much as breathe a word to Liam or anyone else, we'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you." For a moment, I thought she might call our bluff, but then she stood the folder, clutched tightly in her hands. "You'll regret this," she said before storming out. Isabella's departure should have been a relief, but it left behind a trail of destruction. Oliver and I were more careful than ever, but the weight of what we'd done was impossible to ignore. Liam began to notice the tension. His gaze lingered on me longer than usual. "Is something going on?" he asked one evening as we sat in the living room. "No," I said quickly. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged. "You've been distant lately, and Oliver seems different, too. I just hope everything's okay." The guilt was suffocating. For a few days after Isabella left town, things seemed calm. Oliver and I kept our distance while Liam was home, speaking only when necessary, careful not to let our closeness betray us. But the unease lingered. The cracks were showing. One evening, Liam asked me to join him for dinner at a new restaurant in town, a rare occurrence given his usual workaholic tendencies. I agreed, though I wasn't sure if I was more anxious about leaving Oliver alone or about spending hours pretending everything was fine with Liam. "I've been feeling like we've grown apart," Liam said over appetizers, his tone cautious. I froze the glass of wine halfway to my lips. "What makes you say that?" He hesitated, swirling his drink. "I don't know. Maybe it's the stress from work, but it feels like you're somewhere else lately, like your heart's not in it anymore." Guilt washed over me, but I forced myself to smile. "You've been busy?" "Liam, maybe we just need to make more time for each other." He nodded, though his expression didn't lighten. The reprieve was short-lived. 2 days later, a package arrived in the mail addressed to Liam. I found it on the kitchen counter. When I came home from running errands, the sight of Isabella's handwriting on the envelope made my heart plummet. I tore it open, my hands trembling. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Thought you'd like to see what your wife and son have been up to." The implications were clear. Panic surged through me as I shoved the note and USB into my pocket. If Liam had seen it first, I couldn't let myself think about what might have happened. I called Claire immediately. "She's still playing games," I said, pacing the living room. "I thought we scared her off," Claire said, her voice sharp with frustration. "So did I." "Do you think Liam saw it?" "No, I got to it first," I replied, "but we need to destroy it. Whatever's on that drive can't exist." Later that night, when the house was quiet, I locked myself in the study and plugged the USB into Liam's computer. My hands shook as I clicked through the files, photos, videos, nothing explicit, but enough to suggest what had been happening enough to ruin everything if Liam ever saw them. I erased the data and smashed the USB with my heel, but the harm had already been done. Isabella wouldn't stop until she'd ruined us. The next morning, I faced Ollie. "She's still coming after us," I responded, my voice tight with concern. His expression clouded. "I will manage it." "No," I replied strongly. "We need to end this for good." Oliver looked at me, his jaw tight. "How do we do that?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but we can't keep waiting for her to strike." Claire came through again, digging deeper into Isabella's life. She uncovered something I hadn't expected. Isabella had been fired from her last job for embezzlement. Armed with this new information, I devised a risky plan. Oliver and I arranged to meet Isabella at a motel on the edge of town, far from prying eyes. She arrived late, her expression smug as she sauntered into the room. "Miss me," she said, dropping her purse onto the bed. "We're done playing games," I said. Standing my ground, her smirk faltered. "Oh, are we? That's cute." Oliver stepped forward, his voice low and steady. "We know about the money you stole from your last job. We know everything." Isabella's confidence wavered, but she recovered quickly. "So what, you think anyone's going to believe you? You're the ones with something to lose, not me." I pulled out a folder of documents that Claire had gathered, bank statements, emails, and a signed complaint from Isabella's former employer. Isabella's eyes narrowed as she snatched the folder from my hands. "This is blackmail," she hissed. It's leverage. I corrected you. Leave us alone and this stays between us. But if you try anything else, this goes to the police for the, first time. Isabella looked genuinely shaken. She threw the folder onto the bed and stormed out without another word. The relief was short-lived. A week later, Liam confronted me in the kitchen. Something's not right, he said, his tone cold and accusing. What are you talking about? I asked, feigning ignorance. You and Oliver? He said bluntly. I've seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him. My blood ran cold. Liam, that's ridiculous, is it? He snapped, because I don't think it is. I think there's something going on and I want the truth. I felt the walls closing in around me. There's nothing to tell, I said quietly, but Liam didn't believe me. His accusation lingered in the air, heavy and oppressive. His eyes bore into mine, searching for a crack in my defense. There's nothing going on, I said again, forcing my voice to remain steady. He's your son. How can you even think that Liam didn't blink? I know what I see. Amelia, don't insult my intelligence. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I felt my composure slipping. Noah, I said, trying to redirect. If there's something bothering you, let's talk about it. But throwing baseless accusations around baseless, his voice rose, cutting me off. Then why is Isabella saying otherwise? My stomach dropped. Isabella. Liam nodded sharply. She called me, told me some things I didn't want to believe, said she had proof. I took a deep breath. She's angry that Oliver moved on from her. She's trying to cause trouble, and you're saying there's nothing to her story. I held his gaze, nothing. For a moment, I thought he might believe me. But then he turned and walked out of the room without another word, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding in my chest. That night, Oliver came to my room, his face pale, his movements tense. What's going on? He asked, closing the door behind him. Liam, know something, I said, my voice trembling. Isabella must have gotten to him before we stopped her. Oliver sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clenched into fists. What do we do? I don't know, I admitted. But if he finds out the truth, he won't believe it. We won't let him, Oliver said firmly, but I could see the fear in his eyes mirroring my own. The next evening, Liam insisted. We have dinner together as a family. It was rare for him to make such a request, and the forced civility of it set my nerves on edge. The three of us sat at the dining table, the clink of silverware against plates, the only sound for long stretches of time. So, Oliver, Liam said, suddenly breaking the silence. How's the job search going? Oliver looked up, caught off guard. Fine. I've been looking at a few opportunities. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. I was starting to wonder if you planned on staying here indefinitely. The comment was pointed, and Oliver stiffened. It's not like I'm in your way, he said quietly. Liam's gaze flicked to me, then back to Oliver. No, but I think it's time you moved on, don't you? I opened my mouth to intervene, but Liam held up a hand. I think we've all gotten a little too comfortable with this arrangement. It's not healthy. Oliver stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. If you've got something to say, just say it. Liam leaned back in his chair, his expression cold. Fine. I think it's time for some honesty from both of you. My heart pounded as Liam's eyes locked onto mine. The room seemed to shrink around me as I tried to find the words to diffuse the situation. But before I could speak, Oliver stepped forward. There's nothing to say, he said, his voice firm. Isabella's lying. She's trying to mess with us because I broke things off with her. Liam's eyes narrowed. And why would she involve Amelia in he? Our lies? She's desperate, Oliver said. She'd do anything to get back at me, and dragging Amelia into it was just the easiest way to hurt me. Liam's gaze didn't waver, and you expect me to believe that? Yes, Oliver said, because it's the truth. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, Liam stood his movements slow and deliberate. Maybe it is, he said finally, but I'm not convinced, and until I am, I think I'm going to have to wait. Think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. Oliver looked at me, his eyes filled with an unspoken question. I wanted to tell him to stay, to fight this together, but I knew it would only make things worse. It's fine, Oliver said quietly. I'll go. The house felt emptier without him. Liam seemed satisfied with Oliver's absence, though his suspicion toward me hadn't entirely dissipated. I called Oliver every day, though our conversations were brief and strained. He had rented a small apartment on the other side of town and was trying to focus on work, but I could hear the frustration in his voice. I hate this, he said one night. Being away from you, letting her win. It's temporary, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. But the distance was taking its toll just when I thought things couldn't get worse. Isabella made her final move. 1. She arrived to Liam's workplace in the afternoon while I was out conducting errands. She didn't have evidence, but she had enough of the narrative to raise doubts in his mind. I returned home. Liam waited for me in the living room. Sit down, he urged, his tone chilly. I obeyed the shaking of my palms in my lap. Isabella came to see me, he said. She told me everything, or at least enough to make me wonder what you've been telling me. Liam. She's lying, I answered hastily. Is she? He snapped, because it was beginning to seem like everyone was lying to him. The room remained quiet for what seemed like an age. Then he rose and proceeded to the door. He replied, I'm leaving. Don't call me until you're ready to tell me the truth. Liam did not return home that night, nor did he answer the phone the night after I called him. The home was terribly silent, and for the first time, I questioned if I'd actually lost everything. Oliver arrived a few days later, his worry clear as he went through the door. Are you okay? He questioned, bringing me into a tight hug. I don't know. I acknowledged tears flowing down my cheeks. I do not know. He remained with me that night, and for a little period, everything seemed okay. But the harm had been done, and I knew that our lives would never be the same.